everybody. First, I'd just like to say I've only been here 24 hours, and the sense of warmth, kind of human warmth and friendship that's been kind of coming out of just being with everybody has been exceptional. It's fantastic. There's a kind of amazing spirit that you can just feel building in all of this. Just quite wonderful. Anyway, the Schizophrenic Road. It's you guys too. The Schizophrenic Road, it's a journey. It's a journey that started for me quite a long time ago. And I've put it together in a series of little stories that kind of make sense, and actually some of them are complete nonsense, but are so on purpose. And what happened probably about 7 or 8 years ago, I was involved in a public debate at the British Museum in London. And it was one of my first times I've ever been in kind of like speaking in the public domain. And I was very anxious about it, and before the whole thing started, I went for a little walk around the museum. And just down the corridor from where we were talking, I walked into this little room, and I found this amazing object, which was, I think, about 38,000 years old. It was a hand axe, a beautifully created, carved hand axe. And it just suddenly dawned on me that we are all, and I was in this process that's been going on for thousands of years of people making things, creating things, designing things. And I suddenly just felt this kind of weight that, blimey, I have to do justice to my time. And it just seemed to make so much sense. I'd never really kind of felt that before. And for me, it seems like a truth. We're going to be some kind of digital archaeology one day. And God hope it's good stuff. Anyway, the Schizophrenic Road. So it's littered with friends and colleagues and influences. This guy's someone who spoke here quite a few years ago, Alan Fletcher. He's one of the founders of Pentagram. And he and I, about 10 years ago, became really good friends. And I wasn't in Pentagram then. I had my own company with Dominic Lipper. And I used to go around to Alan's studio in the evenings. He's a wonderfully generous man, as long as you bought a very lovely bottle of red wine. And we used to sit, and he was very open and shared his work. And I loved what he did. It had this wonderful kind of subversive quality where he would just take something and just by writing on it or sticking a few bits of apparent junk together, create gold dust. And he had a huge influence on me. And I used to show him things too. And one evening, and I took these pictures about nearly 20 years ago now, I showed him this photograph, and I didn't really realize, how much there was in it. And he looked at me and said, "Harry, you've discovered the first schizophrenic road." And because it kind of is. So then I showed him this one, and he just said to me, whatever you do, never stop collecting this stuff. And I haven't. Actually, I carry a camera with me wherever I go. And it just gets your head in a different place. It helps you think differently about what you're doing. He said, you've got to use this. You've got to stay here when you're doing other kind of creative work. So I realized that this is a little sketch I made when I was about 12 on the back of a school book. And it isn't particularly anything special. It's just I kind of found this a while ago, realizing I was making little visual games and pictures out of words a long time ago. And at about the same time as I saw Alan, when he kind of recognized this road whole theme, I started working with a little game that I set up for myself out of his way of saying, get your head in this other place. So I set myself a little set of rules, which was one box, 2 colors, 1 typeface. And you take a phrase and you have to kind of turn it into something else. So that's gone but not forgotten. That's splitting headache. And they're just nonsense, but it's just about doing stuff. That's one more river to cross. I mean, you honestly can't get dumber than some of this stuff, can you? More often than not. Vanishing cream. Now, I thought these were just nonsense, and we made a poster out of them and sent them out to all our friends and colleagues one Christmas. And part of what I'm going to talk about, and you'll see it kind of reappear, is that if you have an idea, that idea can have a whole trajectory of its own. It's not necessarily anything to do with you in the end. It's just a thought you had, any thought, and it has a whole kind of journey that it makes on its own. This went out to loads of people, and they all loved it, and I was just really surprised by it. And then a group of writers called 26 in London launched, on their launch night, they asked me to do the kind of the logo for the group, but also produce this broadsheet that was full of conundrums. So these are really serious writers who wanted to just use this as a way of saying, actually, language is fun. You know, it's just a game, and it can be as pictorial as it is, you know, the written word. So that was the first kind of iteration and life it took on. Then Alan was art director of Phaidon at the time, and he said to me, listen, I really think you should make a book out of this. I'd never ever had an intention of doing any such thing. And he said, make a mock-up. That's a couple of pages from the mock-up. I'll take it to Phaidon, and I'm sure they'll go for it. So he took this mock-up along. I think there was some kind of interest, but then Alan died, and I lost my sponsor. So the Conundrums disappeared. And then 3 years ago, I joined Pentagram. And I think it's a kind of punishment, because there's 18 partners, and when you're a new partner, you get given the job of doing the holiday card or the Christmas card that year, and you know, it's quite a test. So this is what I did for the holiday cards. We always do these little booklets which get sent out. And I guess it was rather cowardly, but I kind of leant back on an old idea. So this is the cover. You kind of slip the cover off, and hidden underneath is the word decipher. And so each of the spreads, they're not conundrums, they're actually lots of different ways of hiding meaning within visual language. And some are very complex and some are very easy. But weirdly, this went out to a lot of clients. It landed up in the hands of a wonderful man called Terence Schaefer, who was the design director of Saks, who Michael had been working with. And Terence, through Michael, contacted me and said, look, we would love to take your ideas, some of these conundrums, and we want to run it all the way through the Saks catalogue next Christmas, so that people are kind of, I guess, slowed down and they have a bit of fun on the way going through the actual catalogue. So he asked me to produce 100 conundrums, which I did, and we created a little puzzle, and it ran through the catalogue. My intention was to hide them, actually, and I did them all in red, and then when I was a bit shocked to find that all the pages were largely white. So they didn't get hidden, particularly. And that one's talking shop. And so this is how this little trajectory thing works. So the proofs of this were sitting on his desks. HarperCollins in New York were in to see him talk about their Christmas book promotions. And this wonderful man, Terence Schaefer, I think he did say he's going to become my agent, said to HarperCollins, you know, someone was interested in this being a book. You should grab this before it goes. And I was over in New York a couple of weeks later, and lo and behold, they asked me to come and see them, and we struck up a deal that afternoon. So this is the mock-up that we made, and then on the 10th of December, unbelievably, in New York, the actual Conundrums got launched. And I feel like it had so little to do with me, you know, it went off on this journey all of its own, and I think it can happen with all our stuff, you know, it's weird how that thing goes. But I've always done lots of things, playing games, things I've learned from Alan, I guess, kind of subversive games with type and objects. So this was originally a pack of cards, and I removed all the normal kind of iconography. In fact, anything that tells you it's a normal card, I've reduced to a little thing in the corner. And it's very easy to give yourself 4 suits based on 4 typefaces and swap the K for a king image for a K, and a Q for a queen, and an A for an ace. It's amazing what you can do. You can reduce it. It's still recognizable and playable. But what I thought would be great is, part of the game, is that on the back of every card is a cheat. We contacted a card shark, and he told us 52 of the greatest cheats that you can ever play on anyone else. So I thought what would be hilarious is if whatever you're doing when you're sitting playing cards, you can cancel each other out because you're showing each other the cheats that you could ever potentially do. And I couldn't use the real names for these cheats, so what we did is we made up names to do with the kind of, this is about hiding packs of cards on your legs. And you can just kind of twist it. So this is another character. In my second year at college, I kind of lost my way. I really didn't know if I was doing the right thing, and a couple of brilliant tutors, it's funny how people come along, external tutors came along, and one guy turned me on to Marcel Duchamp. And the nature of his thinking is so extraordinary. I mean, I think he's an amazing graphic designer, let alone all the other extraordinary things that he was, chessman and artist and whatever. But this is a little thing that he did when he was in America in the late 40s. So this is a little ampule that you can buy in chemists in Paris. And he wrote back to a friend in Paris and said, get one of these little ampules, snap off the neck, walk outside the store, glue it back on, and send it to me in New York. And then he put this, as, I think it was in the Armory show, and he just called it Paris Air. And it's that kind of thinking is just perfection. You know, it's absolute perfection. Anyway, this is the nearest I've ever got to stealing an idea. But one Christmas, I ran out of time to produce a Christmas card. And in England, like right now, the weather remains really shit for weeks. And we thought what would be really great, so this actually went out in January, what would be really great is to send everybody daylight. So we actually got hold of a baked bean manufacturer and used their system, and we actually sealed these light bulbs in cans and sent them out to everybody. A lot of my other work is very simplistic. So things that I do, I try and reduce things to the minimum. So these are some posters. This is some typographic work for a little small theatre, and so this is just Macbeth made from blood. This is an Ibsen play called The Doll's House, and I just kind of imagined if little kids were kind of making little houses out of wood type, it might look a bit like this. And this is a poster for an extraordinary English musician called Roy Harper, and he did this beautiful set of love songs, and I did the pack and the CD cover and the posters for it. And the simplest way I could find to express anything in this was just to take the word east and move it to the east. And when Dominic and I packed up Harry Pearce 3 and a bit years ago, we did a talk in London, and we closed the door and we joined Pentagram, and we did this speech at the Typographic Circle. And Dom and I had never actually shared the stage together. And what we thought would be great is Alan used to have a thing, he said, you two are kind of almost inseparable in your work, and we've been friends for 26 years. So I did this poster where I just kind of wrapped the two names together, and that just became us for our last night. Okay, this next little story is a love affair. It's a love affair between a building and typography. And before I actually show you that building, this is an identity I did for an architect. And he's an amazing guy. He works solely on ancient and classical buildings, and it's a kind of regenerative thing that he does. And he works incredibly slowly, and he'll go and find whether medieval paint was originally created in what city, or where the trees actually came from, and try and go back to the forest and work out exactly how it was all done. And so his sense of precision is extraordinary. So this is the letterhead I did for him. And when I was doing it, I wanted to get him to understand that I was putting as much precision into his title and his typography as he would have done in his work. So when I showed it to him upside down, and I was saying, you've got to understand it's the gap between things, letter forms, that are as important as the letter forms themselves. And if you turn things upside down, that kind of is a way of seeing it. So this was his letterhead. And then a little while after, and he loved it, and a little while after we had dinner together, and he just said, you've really got me thinking, because I've realized that actually the spaces between buildings are just as important as the buildings themselves, because actually that's where the greater population inhabit. It's the spaces between things. And for me, I've just realized that actually architecture and typography are very, very similar things. And the great tragedy is that if you walk down, certainly in my country, if you walk down a lot of our high streets, there's this great kind of dilemma between what graphic design is and what the buildings are, and they meet in some kind of horrible mess in the middle. Awful bits of acrylic hanging off buildings, and it's just, but it shouldn't need to be like that. People could get together and it could be a very beautiful experience, but it just ain't. On a speech I gave a little while ago, this guy, the architect, sent me these images in the afternoon before I gave it. And this is from an architect from the 17th century who, these actually never got built, but he actually designed buildings around typography. So it shows it can work. This building is called the Dana Centre. It's behind the Science Museum in London. And it's a place where the bottom part of the building, the kind of illuminated windows that you can see, is a cafe and a bar and a debating place. And the whole notion is that science kind of meets the people here. And dispels all the kind of idea of men in white coats and pontificating on high and all that. It's about trying to get the stories over in a very, very down-to-earth way. I mean, you can actually sit in here on a certain nights, and you can eat and watch live brain surgery up on the wall. So it's a pretty extraordinary experience. Anyway, it's an odd thing. So I had to create an identity for this, but I also had to create the theatre that the building became. So it was a real close relationship between architecture and graphic design. And it was called the Dana Center, and it's called that because those are the people that own the building that are sponsoring a lot of research into the human brain. And it's, being the Dana Center, it's a kind of odd thing. I didn't want to do pictures of brains and things as the logos. It's a very odd thing to try and hang an identity from. So what I did, I took the plans of the building, and that became my inspiration for the actual logotype. And this is just how it kind of built. And as the building had given me the inspiration for the logo, I thought what would be really nice is if I gave the building back the logo. So we fed, these are the first 3 floors, and that's a great concrete column that runs right up through the building. So we chopped up the logo and actually fed it with into that concrete. They made some extraordinary plywood shapes that were pressed into the concrete, and it actually became part of the building. So you kind of walk around it, the logo is the building is the logo. And that made us think more and more about how far we could take it. So then I went back and I made the logotype more architectural. And we made models. And then I mean, what's amazed me is that this project kind of went from a little idea and grew and grew. And I thought there would be kind of a resentment for me being so kind of expressive in this space. But what we then started doing is replacing walls with logotypes. So this wall is, you can see this from the street, and you can actually walk in and amongst the identity itself. So things just kept happening, and what I thought would be really wonderful, because this is an amazing place, so you come there to get the answers, and I got into a very kind of playful, subversive thing with this, and I thought, well, it's come the day that science has the last word, that, you know, we get the final answer to whatever it is. That's no reflection on what went on just before I came up. It's all over, you know. This place won't be of any use anymore, will it? It'll be done, and you know, God forbid there will be a final answer. So what I did with a writer is we created dozens of rhetorical questions, things that hopefully, and rather silly ones, things that hopefully will never actually finally be answered. In fact, they're impossible to answer, as far as I know. And what we thought then was get it back into the building. So in the reception area, where you go and sit before you go into the bar or you go to a lecture, we actually made this kind of like bus stop that you sit in, and you're surrounded by hundreds of ridiculous questions that you'll never answer. It doesn't matter how many times you go back there or how long you stare at it, you'll never get to the bottom of it, which we thought was a kind of tongue-in-cheek kind of poke at the whole thing that this building was about. Well, it didn't stop there. So these are the 16 tables implanting philosophies of the future that, again, are like Dadaist nonsense. And they're really crazy. So these are the kind of roughs and ideas that we said, what you could do is you could just hide this. So when people sit around and eat, they'll be surrounded by this stuff. So that's what happened to the tabletops. And they kind of make some sense because they're connected then. But what happens is, this also gets broken up to be a cafe. And so the nonsense gets even more crazy. So it really is funny that you've gone there for the answer, and it's kind of rather impossible to find. That bottom section you saw where the lights were, either side of the building, there are 2 big TV screens. And those screens run throughout the day. And we had to find a way of controlling the lights so that people could, you know, sit and eat and watch these things even if there's blazing sunlight. So you can see on that kind of sketch where the dark cross-hatching is, that had to be completely opaque. And as you move up and as you move to the center, it gets ever more transparent. And I thought, what am I going to, you know, I wasn't just going to put blocks of color or whatever to do. How am I going to do this and keep the integrity of the building and keep the spirit of what we were talking about and the notion of what this whole place was about? So it's a bit like this, you know, we're here, we're all going to be listening, talking, sharing things. And that stuff, where does it go? You know, and I thought of this phrase of, you know, if these walls could talk. And maybe there is a memory of everything that goes on today retained in this the structure of this building. Who knows? So the idea was that I'd try and do something typographically that would allow me to control the light, but also become a tapestry of conversation. So if you zoom in close, what this is one typeface, and it's dozens and dozens of snippets from web chat rooms of people talking to each other. None of them start or finish properly, so again, it's impenetrable. And it really is just a decorative tapestry. And some start on the outside and some continue on the inside of the building. So again, it's just a big tease. And if it'd just been a few words, if you'd kind of visit this building and it had been a few words, you'd been bored with it really, really quickly. So no matter how many times you go back, you just keep seeing little snippets of things. And some of them are like old guys talking to each other, lovers, kids, all sorts of things. And it's all mixed up. And what happens then is you get this kind of relationship with the light throwing the words back onto the tables, and then the tables have a relationship with the walls, so that you're enveloped in this kind of typographic, well, if you're into typography, heaven, but if you're not, you'll probably run out screaming. But what also happens that as the daylight changes and night comes, or the twilight comes, everything gets reversed, and you just get this lovely, rich kind of, again, tapestry of color and typography, but it's actually doing a job. The next little story is one that Michael alluded to a little earlier on. This is something that's really close to my heart and something that kind of changed my life probably about 17 years ago. When we set up Harry Pearce, we decided that we'd always do commercial work, and what we'd always try and do is balance that with work for charities. And we worked for a whole number of different charities. We couldn't give money, but we gave our time, our design time. And about 17 years ago, I got involved with a thing called Witness through this guy, Peter Gabriel. And I had met, when I was in about 1981, I tried to go to one of his concerts in Bath, and I'd hitched down from London. I didn't have a ticket, didn't get in, but I bumped into him in the afternoon before the concert in an African art exhibition in Bath. And we got talking, and then years later when we actually set up Harry Pearce, amazingly, I never can quite remember how it happened, he invited me down to his studios, and we had lunch together and we talked about my work and his work, and something kind of happened then, but we didn't actually end up working together at all. And then a year after that, I got a phone call from a lady in The Hague, an American lady, who said that Peter Gabriel had got in contact with her, and she was flying back through London, could she come and see me? And she ended up being the marketing director of the Lawyers Committee for Human Rights in New York. And she asked me, would I do a corporate identity for them, which I very happily did. And that became a whole kind of relationship with New York that I started to have. What I didn't know is that Peter had started this other thing which was connected to the Lawyers Committee for Human Rights. So he had this idea, and I think this is why I responded to it so strongly, is he thought that if Little Brother, us, could turn the cameras back on Big Brother, what an amazing, powerful tool that would be. And I think it was generally kind of written off as a kind of rock star, indulgent, rather stupid idea, but the fact was, then there was the Rodney King beating in LA. And, you know, that brought LA to its knees. And after that, suddenly this idea didn't seem such a crazy thing. You know, this kind of rough bit of camera work that caught the police beating up this guy was extraordinarily powerful. And so Peter's original idea suddenly became something of real worth. Reebok put up $1 million, some other people put money in, and Witness was born. And it just so happened that what Peter realized was that what he wanted to do was get cameras out around the world, let people record things, get them back to this central hub, and then connect them with great lawyers. Because if you just have film, you've got an archive, and you have to turn that into a proactive thing to bring about change. So Peter connected with the Lawyers Committee for Human Rights, who I was just finishing this bit of work with, and then he made this very short, very rough little piece of film with Chiat Day, which they showed me. And I was amazed by that. It's just the simplicity of it, the beauty of the writing juxtaposed with the images. I just thought it was sensational, no matter how rough. All the better for being rough, I think. And it just made me realize that what I really wanted to do was, instead of working for all these different charities, we should dedicate ourselves to one of them. So we made Witness part of our daily life at Harry Pearce. And I'm really happy to say that the Pentagram and we all carry on exactly the same way now. So it isn't that I just to do the occasional campaign. Every single day, we're there producing all the graphic kind of needs that these guys that they have. And because I had the same feeling that you can have a film archive, but you need to make it do something. And I imagined these really integrous pieces of film landing on people's desks in crap old envelopes and not getting looked at. And I thought, everything they do should have the same kind of quality as the films themselves. So I started working on campaigns with Peter and then doing all the other stuff. And he made me promise that if it ever became a threat to my kind of livelihood, that I'd back off. But it's amazingly, and I've been close a few times, but it's never actually been that big a threat. So we actually run this every day. So they're just very simple ideas of trying to turn campaigns that Witness are recording into graphic statements. And they build up to usually a big night in New York, which is where people actually, child soldiers come and talk, and there are performances, and then there's money raised, and Witness can live for another 6 months. This one, though, is an intriguing one, because it's that sort of trajectory of something that you have no idea what's going on once you set an idea in motion. This was a poster I did for a campaign just over 2 years ago for 3,000 villages were being burnt in East Timor by the military junta, and then the villages were being driven out into Thailand and various other places. And there were films being got out of this stuff. And normally, when Witness try and get me to use ordinary imagery to kind of tell the story, because that's what they're about, filmmaking. But I had this really strong feeling that we had to have an icon, we had to have something, because it may have well just been the villages, but the fact was, if you can do that in your villages, your own country's on fire. So we actually, this isn't Photoshop, we actually set light to loads of wooden letters and then shot them. And this was sent all over the world through Witness, and they work with kind of like connected groups, a lot of time undercover, but it went all over the world. What I didn't realize, obviously, 6 months later, when the priests rose up in Burma and were brutally suppressed, that suddenly someone rang me and said, "Get your TV on," because people were taking this poster out on the streets all over the world, kind of spontaneously, and I had nothing to do with that, and I couldn't believe it. And I always feel like if I don't ever do anything else again in my life, at least I've kind of done this, and it really kind of worked. And I do lots of little things where it's just trying to make graphic statements they come up with a little bit more memorable. This is a little campaign that I worked on with Peter, where I had the idea of seeing is believing, and him being this great lyricist and writer reduced it just down to see, believe. And so wherever we had a picture, we had the word see, and where we had the pragmatic facts of why this happened and how they made things change, we used the word believe. But you can see how technology has changed over the last 17 years. So that first camera was Rodney King was recorded on, right through to the fact that we can all do this on our phones today. You can capture anything. Extraordinary stuff is being got at from, you can see what's come out of Iran, and it's coming out of our own countries. And we've got Witness programs going on in the UK, in the US, all over the world. And it's amazing stuff. So Peter's latest idea, which is kind of 2 years old now, but it's to create a kind of YouTube for human rights. There's a central place online that anyone, anywhere can upload their stuff and try and get connected and try and get support. And we were hearing earlier about the voice of the speechless. This is absolutely what this is about. So this is the little logo for the hub, and it kind of just sits there against these stories. And these are some of the campaigns that were going on last year. So it's actually, we've infiltrated all over the world with this. It's amazing. And these are the covers for lots of the DVDs. They actually get made into real proper DVDs. Now, this lady in Kosovo, she is someone who we've been working with on a couple of films for, and she has made several kind of controversial films. And last July, she was dragged out of her house and taken over the border. I think she went into Uzbekistan and shot in the head and the chest and killed, and she's actually part of a witness. And suddenly it struck us that this is like your client. And in July, we were all sitting around working on various things, and suddenly this person was just taken away and shot. I mean, and it just suddenly brought it home of how important it was, how real it was, and how we'll never stop doing it. So back to Alan. Alan contacted me when he was doing his last book, and he said, please, can you know, I told you about those pictures all those years ago. I'm hoping you've been out recording them and keeping them. Well, I carry a camera with me wherever I go, and I record loads of typographic stuff all over the place. But the one thing I hadn't done is precisely gone and shot any more of these road signs for him. So he said, I've got 2 weeks to get to the printers. We kind of need the artwork, we need it done. So the studio, we all kind of legged it all over London and shot dozens and dozens of these, trying to find stupid signs in London, and eventually made a spread out of it, which got in the book. This is the last time I saw Alan. This was when I joined Pentagram. We all met in Paris, and Alan, who was actually terribly ill, and I didn't know how ill he was, and I had breakfast with him, and he was actually really struggling to breathe, was dying, and we sat there, and I think it amazed me that I suddenly was hit by the kind of gravity of what was happening to him. And we had this lovely, if kind of quiet breakfast together. And he went off back into his room, and I kind of went off into walking in Paris in tears. I just couldn't quite believe what was happening. Anyway, what did happen was, I think everyone would recognize this as one of Alan's most beautiful logos that I'm sure will last forever. But I was walking through an old market place 40 minutes after I'd been with Alan, and I saw this box. And I thought it was so beautiful. It was like it was meant to be, it was this wonderful little bit of synchronicity. Something just popped up. So I photographed it and very hurriedly framed it and sent it to Alan, and it's still sitting in his studio. And it's just, part of this talk is about magic and about how brilliant things just happen. Fine ideas go off and do things, but if you've got the kind of eye to see and just feel and let these things happen, they're all around happening all the time. So this last little section is where things get a little bit more personal. And it's only kind of in the last year or so, less than a year, that I've ever kind of gone out and talked about this stuff. But sounds like I'm going to say something really terrible now, doesn't it? But it's not, I promise you. Like a big confession. I've got a few of those, but you're not hearing them. So when I was 17, I read this book by Carl Jung called Memories, Dreams, Reflections. And it was a life-changing thing. I didn't understand it, but I absolutely felt it. It's the last book that he kind of wrote before he died. And what it made me do, I began recording my dreams. And on and off, I've kept them. And I would say in the last probably 6 years, I've been really quite religious about it, and I kind of record them every day. And I keep these notebooks, and I write them down, make little sketches, and then kind of watch and see what happens. Now, I'm not saying this is right or wrong. All I know is what happens to me is that it's just like this other world, a very creative world, an extraordinary world that's just bubbling alongside your kind of daily world, that it's there in all of us, and all you have to do is tune into it a little bit, and it's rich. It's really rich and fantastic. So this is a lake in Switzerland, and what we do in Pentagram every 6 months, we meet once in the west and once in the east. And a couple of years ago, we were up in the Swiss mountains, and after the kind of gathering was over, everyone headed off in their different ways, and I decided to stay in Switzerland and try and find the places where Carl Jung lived. And he built this extraordinary place where he used to kind of hide away and write and do all his deep thinking on a little building on Lake Zurich. So I grabbed a cab early in the morning. This amazing Italian cab driver was taking me down through the mountains, and he just pulled over at this place and pulled over to this car park, and he said, "Come and look at this." So I looked out across the scene, and this is the photograph I took from that car park. And he said, "This is a beautiful, beautiful place. You really should see it." And while I was standing there, I suddenly realized it was completely a scene from a dream that I'd had less than 2 weeks before. And in the dream, I stand on the right-hand hill, and I walk through the air to the left-hand hill. And each time I do this, and I do it probably 3 or 4 times, I'm less able to make that trip. And by the time I get to the last one, my heel is just dipping in the water. But the weird thing is, as I make that trip, just below the surface of the water following me is a whale. And it relentlessly does this as I go over the divide. And I just looked at the scene and it all came rushing back. Anyway, jumped in the car and I said to the guy, God, this is what I imagined Lake Zurich to be. And he said, no, it's not Lake Zurich, we're not there yet. And he was talking, 10 to the dozen. And he said, no, that's Lake Walensee. Anyway, carry on driving. And then he says, you know Lake Walensee? I said, no, I've never heard of it. He said, yeah, it means the Lake of the Whale. Which just kind of stopped me in my tracks. But this stuff just keeps happening to me, and it's just proof that this is not being chased by whales. No, just that these things just keep happening. And I've just kind of, I just use them, and they're just lovely, lovely things. So the reason this section's called Until the Last Butterfly is because at the end of a dream once, and I'm not a writer, I'm not a poet or anything, this beautiful, simple little phrase, I was left with that, until the last butterfly. And what is it? Is it the last kind of natural moment on this planet? Is it the destruction of the last butterfly? Is it? I mean, it's just so kind of zen-like and beautiful. I've no idea, but I just loved it and cherished it. Now, a very good friend of mine, a neighbor, is a guy called Steve Hackett, who weirdly was a guitarist in Genesis in the 70s, and Peter Gabriel got him into Genesis when he was part of it. And much as anything else, he plays a lot of classical guitar, and I go around and listen to him, and he comes around and hangs out with me, and I went around one day, not long after this dream, and he was sitting there playing this piece of music. And I said, what do you know, because he always explains what he does. He said, what I'm trying to do is capture the rhythm of the fluttering of butterflies. Okay. That goes on for about 6 minutes, and I promise you butterfly wings do very similar things for a long time. So I was sitting there talking to him. I said, I don't believe this, Steve. I had this dream, and we was left this lovely line, Until the Last Butterfly. So when that piece of music got published, it got called Until the Last Butterfly. So if you hadn't tuned into that and bothered about it, it would have never have kind of connected and happened. So it's just a lovely, simple, beautiful thing. So this last summer, I've been working with Anish Kapoor. I did an identity for his show at the Royal Academy. And this is the last little dream thing. And I was working in his studio with him. We were trying to kind of decide what to do for the kind of publicity of everything that was going on. And I was amazed and very pleased to find quite a lot of Jung stuff in his studio. And what happened was we came up with this image. This is something that's created. He's got this piece that he does, which is called Shooting into the Corner. And it's a gun that every 20 minutes or so someone fires for 3 months, and you just build up this great big kind of mass of red wax and resin. Each one of those is a gun. It's kind of like a gunshot. And we used a lot of that to create the identity program. And I'd finished it all, and I was getting on a plane to give a talk in New Zealand, and they rang me and said, look, well, actually, it was 2 days to go. We need a 20-second piece of film to go as a little kind of teaser in cinemas. And I said, there's no way I can do this. It'd be really unprofessional of me to say yes, and I just can't possibly do that. And they said, well, you can't use real film, it has to be stills. Surely you can do something with it. And I thought, well, I just kept backing off. Anyway, I got on the plane, and I fell asleep, and I had this dream, and I dreamt this whole sequence. I've never actually seen this thing happen, but every shot of the gun kind of just built this scene. So this was actually what happened. So when I landed in New Zealand, I quickly wrote an email to this editor, and he actually made that straight from my dream, and I didn't even see it getting made till I got back to England. But it was all still too late. We couldn't get it done in time in the deadline. And then this is what the campaign looked like. And I realized my dream had been the whole campaign in reverse. It's kind of weird. So a very good friend of mine, Stefan Sagmeister, we travel and talk quite a lot together, and we get into a lot of heavy debates about this stuff, and I'm sure a lot of you know his work. He produced this when he did his whole series of things that, you know, the things that he discovered in his life. So when I saw that, I couldn't help replying. Anyway, so this is the last few pictures, and this is where the nonsense bit kind of kicks back in, and it's light and breezy after all that human rights stuff. But you know, we saw that lovely, beautiful, and very kind of emotive street art, and this is not that. This is a bunch of mistakes, and I've got thousands of these. I mean, I carry a camera, as I said, wherever I go, and I just collect them. And this is in the car park of Euston Station. This is a kind of slightly obtuse one, but why would you write the words "keep clear" and then someone else put big yellow stripes over it? And it's like a perfect Duchamp thing, isn't it? It's one thing cancelling out another, and it's mad and stupid. And I'm sure there are a lot of people looking, never finding that. This is for confused architects. This was a beautiful thing in the back street of in New York, and you know you couldn't do better than remove the word "go," could you? Because it's just kind of physically done what the graphic designer wanted to do. But they're brilliant. This is Euston Station. Now, graphic designers have got a lot to answer for. This is in my hometown of London. This is also quite brilliant. This is Euston Station. This is a train time in Euston Station. This is Barclays Bank. Some of them are just beautiful because they are what they are. And this is, like, nature has done the work here and removed just about everything. It's just so perfect. This is another one. This is on a gravestone in Manchester, and if you squint, you can probably see the word stone, but it is what it is. It's beautiful. I don't know what that's alluding to, but it reminds me of a few people. Some things, when you just take them out of their context. This is actually at the airport in New Zealand where I arrived. And it's not a mistake, it's just kind of been removed from reality. This is one I got literally last week. This is my little chip shop back home. Anyway, this is the final one. This is a tree in Zanzibar. And it's so, so perfect. Because whoever pulled the nail out was a genius. So I did keep doing these when Alan told me to keep looking, I did. And he used to have this thing, which I think he nicked from Matisse, but he used to have this saying that the world is full of flowers if you only have eyes to see. And I know we're all thinking it is crap, but it's also, they're as beautiful as flowers to my eyes. And the last slide is a flower that Alan drew and gave me many years ago. And with that, thank you very much, folks.